Hi, everyone, and thanks for joining us again for today's Love Transformation class. And this is a really important conversation because I'm sure that all of you can relate to this experience of feeling like you're dating the same kind of guy or a similar kind of pattern is showing up in your love life, and you're not really sure where it's coming from or what to do about it. And we have got all the answers for you today with my beautiful expert, Veronica Grant. Welcome, Veronica.
Thanks so much for having me. I'm super excited to be here.
Now, I'm not very biased, but you are one of my favorite love coaches in this industry. And I love the wisdom that you share, like from the perspective of someone who really is at the front line of dating and experiencing all these challenges that we have with this kind of unhealthy patterns and these unavailable men and experiencing all these things. Can you tell me a little bit about your story?
Yeah, so my story is that I was attracting the same guy over and over again with a different face, meaning that I was attracting a guy who on the outside looked like he was well, I don't know, from my perspective, outside, he looked like he was ready for a relationship and on paper looked great, checked off all of the boxes, great job, looks good. I mean, I'm Jewish, so he was Jewish, all these arbitrary things. And we would either just go on one, maybe two dates, or just kind of do the thing where we're kind of hanging out, but nothing really serious or tangible. And nothing would actually turn into an actual relationship or any kind of commitment, pretty much at all. And so that was really my pattern for a really long time. And obviously hindsight's 2020, and I've done a ton of work on my own life and also now with my, the lives of my clients. And I can see very clearly what was happening then. But my work what I really try to help my clients with is to try to create that bird's eye or that hindsight perspective in more real time. So you can kind of catch yourself when you're in a pattern or operating under a limiting belief or whatever it is that's keeping up a block or keeping like the same guy, over and over again. And ultimately what my block was that, from a pretty young age, I was taught to believe that you had to look a certain way, mostly as it related to your weight, in order to just be like happy and be good enough. And for whatever reason, I very much closely tied that with men and getting men's approval. And in fact, when I started my business, I was actually a health coach, and I was like, oh, body image was like a thing for me for a long time. And so that's what I'm going to help other women work through with. And what I realized, I was working with my own coach at the time as well. I just got really bored talking about body image all the time. I was like, I just don't want to talk about this anymore. And I was just talking about my coach and we were just kind of, having a pretty deep session. And it came out that the reason why I cared about body image was because I needed to get that validation from men. And so that's a whole other story, which how I transformed my business. But basically what I realized is that I had just created this whole facade of this awesome little Veronica who's great on paper, right, as a partner. But, it's kind of like the three little pigs. You can just blow that house down. Like beneath that, there is nothing there. And so it's not surprising that I was attracting people, all these one date wonders, or people where it was just kind of like a we're going to hang out kind of thing. And it's not ever going to be anything real or serious or whatever, because I was attracting people who also had on some level that facade. It was just mirroring back to me what was true for my own self and the relationship that I had with myself and my body, but also my deeper spiritual self as well. So that's kind of my story and, what my block was and pattern and how I eventually was able to shift it.
It sounds very familiar, actually. I started out my coaching journey as a weight loss coach and found that the majority of conversations I was having with clients as well turned to relationships.
Yeah.
And turned to our experience. And I was so much more passionate about that than talking about, diets and food and exercise and that sort of thing. So I can definitely relate. But what I'm so curious about, and to hear your thoughts as well, the psychology behind why, as intelligent women, as successful women, we can sometimes see or identify that someone's maybe not quite right? There may be red flags early on. Why do we ignore those red flags, perhaps, and keep finding ourselves pursuing that same wrong guy?
Yeah. So a big part of that has to do with love, safety, and belonging. And really all of our blocks and limiting beliefs go back to that in some way or another. And so when we were little, or when you were little, at some point you learned what love, safety, and belonging meant and how to get it. Now I talk a lot about inner child work. And what I mean by that is going back and healing past wounds from childhood and, from as far back as you can remember. And a lot of times people are like, well, that happened when I was 3 years old, like who cares or whatever. But the thing is that whatever happened, and whether it was like something we would call traumatic, like violence or any kind of abuse or abandonment or divorce, like obviously those are going to create some really real beliefs about what love, safety, and belonging means and how to get it. But even if that wasn't your childhood, and even if from the outside everything looked great and idyllic, you still created beliefs around how to get love, safety, and belonging. And so let's just say it was something like your parents were great parents, but they were just really busy raising a bunch of kids and working all the time, right? And so you couldn't get the love and attention that you thought that you wanted. And so the only way you realized in order to be able to get that was maybe to make really good grades or to win a soccer game or like whatever it is. And so you create this belief now, okay, in order to get love or in order to feel like I belong in the family, in order to feel secure or like that emotional security, then I need to succeed or I need to do something, like it's earned in some way. And so, yeah, this might look like how it looks when you're 10 years old, but then when you're 30 years old, if you haven't dismantled this core belief that you created when you were young, then you're still going to be operating underneath those tenets. It just might look a little different because you're 30 years old now. You're not 10 years old anymore, right? So it might look like you have to show off for a guy or look a certain way or act a certain way or be a certain kind of woman in order to get someone's approval, attention, love, all those types of things in order to feel like you belong, feel loved, and feel the security. And so that's really that's how it works. That's where it comes from. And I don't remember the initial question that you asked me, but I think I answered it, right?
You did. And I wanted to specifically ask you about a really common thing that I hear from women as well, which is this experience of feeling like the guy is not quite emotionally invested. And I know it's easy for us to blame the guy and say he's non-committal, he's emotionally unavailable, even throwing around that word is narcissistic or whatever. But what is it about it? If we can tell that the other person's not as invested as perhaps where we are emotionally invested in the relationship, why as women do we stay?
So there's a lot of reason. It depends on the specific person situation, obviously, but I'll just go over a few. So sometimes we stay or we try to keep getting the attention because there's just a void, right? So again, like if you didn't feel the love or the safety, the belonging from your parents and it left in this void in your life, or this void in your emotional being, then you're going to do everything you can to fill that void. And so when you're then not 10 years old, but 30 years old or 40 years old or however, and you're dating and you feel that void, that wound kind of getting reopened, you're going to want to do everything you can to fill it. And the other thing is that when you're attracting someone who is maybe not available or is not committal or narcissistic or whatever, on some level, that probably feels very familiar to you. And so on some level, there's actually a lot of comfort in that. Even though it may not be something you consciously want, it feels comfortable. I always give an example of driving to work, right? Like if you drive to work every day, you just do it. And sometimes you're like end up in your driveway and like, how did I even get here? You just do it like unconsciously almost. And let's say you move to a new house or you start a new job. And so now your route is different. You have to leave the house like 15 minutes before you normally would need to, because you know that it's going to take you longer because you're gonna have to check, well, what's the traffic like? Should I go this way? What if I miss a turn? Or you don't know like the lanes and what lane you have to be in where, there's just like a lot more things that are going on, and it just feels more draining and more difficult. And part of that is biology. Like if we had to think that hard about everything all the time and nothing ever became just something we unconsciously did, we would not be the humans that we are today, right? Like life would just be a lot more difficult and we wouldn't be operating the way we are. And so the brain just kind of wants you to fall into a habit and wants you to fall into things where it's almost mindless. And I think that's a really big reason why we fall into these relationships that, yes, you can see the red flags. Yes, he's a narcissist. Yes, he's this. Yes, he's that, whatever that is. But it's just comfortable and it's safe, because then if you enter into a relationship or meet someone who's actually available and wants to be in a relationship, you might discover that it actually feels really hard. It brings up your stuff. It brings up like, well, how do I know he's not kidding? Or how do I know he's serious here? Or how do I know that he's not going to just leave me in 6 months? I've coached a lot of women actually who aren't single. They're actually in relationships, but they're freaking out because it's actually a good relationship and they doubt themselves on how to actually be in the relationship and what to do and what not to do. And obviously I believe all of that stuff is very much intuitive, but if you're psyching yourself out because it doesn't feel like all the other relationships, felt like, it's actually a very conscious thing that you had to do in order to enter in that relationship. And the final thing I'll say, and another reason that you might just want to stay, is because on some level, these relationships feel good. When you attract a relationship that's based on core wounds and core issues, those relationships feel so freaking good. They feel like the fireworks. The sexual chemistry is usually out of this world. Like we've all had that person. I mean, maybe not, but I think a lot of us have had that person and we can definitely relate to that. And so it's hard to let those people go because when it fits really well, right? And like you mentioned, narcissists. And so like if you have people-pleasing tendencies, when you attract a narcissist, you are like two peas in a pod. It may not be the pod you want to be in, but narcissists and people-pleasers actually coexist very, very well together. Now it's a toxic relationship, but when that relationship is fit perfectly, it feels really good. Of course, like it gets unfit. And so then it feels like you're going down to the bottom of the roller coaster. It doesn't feel good at all. It's like a low. But it just feels really good and you don't leave the relationship and you're human. Right. And, so those are a bunch of reasons. I mean, and in terms of like specific reasons, obviously that would matter on the specific person and their issues and blocks that they're working through. But those are some big patterns that I've seen.
Yeah, and very prevalent ones as well. What would you say to someone who explained to you that having that chemistry is super, super important to them, and it must have that real feeling of passion, yet their history has been that's been a real roller coaster, that chemistry hasn't necessarily always been healthy? What would be a way around that, still being able to have the chemistry, but having it in a way that's healthy, that's not driven, where our attraction's not driven by those core wounds that you talk about?
Yeah. So this is a really hard thing to break, and it definitely takes a lot of discipline. And honestly, I think it takes getting some support around, honestly, because it's really hard because it feels really freaking good in all the ways. Right. And so a couple of things that I would say is, one, to relearn what love feels like, because these high highs and these low lows, that's not love, right? It might feel like love, but if anything, at best, it's lust. But what I really call it is just getting your itch scratched. And that feels really good too, when you got an itch on the middle of your back and you can't reach it. Right. So it's really getting your itch scratched. And so what I would say is, if something just feels like too good to be true, or the passion feels greater than how well you know the other person, then that would be something I would caution someone to pull back from. And in terms of then moving forward from there and still having that passion, I think you can create that passion, but you can create it from a healthy space. And I think the ways you create it from a healthy space is, one, having a healthy foundation for love. Like, I think trust has to be an ingredient in love, like no matter what. And people will tell me, they've had these high highs, low lows types of relationship, like, oh, but there was trust there. And I'm like, well, not really, because you weren't ever sure like what part of the roller coaster you were on. And so So when you have that trust and then you have that balance of feminine, masculine, and kind of have that polarity, that's where passion comes from. Passion doesn't come from just getting your itch scratched, and passion doesn't come from just like, I don't know, some Cinderella story, but passion comes from the polarity. And I find a lot of, at least, the women that I've worked with have often told me, and I looking back, I can say the same for myself, is that we often attract male versions of ourselves. And then those relationships ultimately feel dull or boring, or they feel boring or bored or whatever it is. And when you attract that kind of person who feels like they look good on paper, but they're really male version of yourself, yeah, there's not really going to be much passion because there's no polarity. But when you attract someone who has real differences from you in a lot of ways, but also then you can play into the feminine, masculine roles. And it doesn't necessarily mean males are the masculine, females are the feminine. Like, it goes back and forth, and there's a balance there. But that's where the passion comes from. And I think in terms of relearning what love feels like, one of the easiest ways to do it is to think of someone in your life that you love, love very deeply. So if you have a kid, it could be a child, it could also be a niece or a nephew. It could even be a freaking puppy. And imagine that love that you feel for that other being. And you can turn it onto yourself, but it doesn't matter because you've already experienced love, and that is love, right? Love is not like this, like, oh, like, I don't know. I'm like almost doing more of like motions than I am using words right now, but it's just not that, that energy where it just feels like fireworks all the time, right? Like, that's just not what it feels like forever. Now, are there moments of that? Of course. Are there definitely moments of like that when you're in that honeymoon period, the first 2 years or so of a relationship? 100%. And you can still create moments of like that within a healthy relationship that's longer term. That's a whole other story. But I would just say to trust that passion exists outside of the realm that you might be used to if you've only been attracting these people where the passion is high and it feels like it's too good to be true.
I love that you brought up a couple of times there the importance of trust. And it's something that, as we have more and more relationship experiences, sometimes I guess our trust can be eroded somewhat. What would you say for the women that are watching that are having difficulties trusting the process, trusting finding the right kind of person, if they've had their heart broken, and or does it actually stem back further than those earlier relationship experiences, that those challenges with trusting?
So I think it always goes back to inner child work. And what I mean by inner child work is, asking yourself, when you're not trusting, you're feeling defeated or whatever it is that you're feeling after a relationship ending or just after a string of bad dates or a lack thereof, then I think it's really important to ask yourself and pause and just ask, okay, how well do I feel right now? When have I felt like this before? What does this remind me of? And then see if you can tie it back to something that happened in childhood. Now, this does not mean the big things that happened. It does not mean that move that your parents made you do when you're 11 years old, or the divorce, or if there's something traumatic or, around violence or abuse or anything like that. It doesn't necessarily have to relate to that. It could just be that time that your parents forgot to pick you up. And like, they're good parents overall, but every parent at least once in their life probably forgets to pick up their kid, right? It could be just something like that, or just really trivial, something that was said to you, because whatever that core wound is, it's just simply getting bumped up against, whenever your trust is eroding, right? That's all that happens. Because remember, if we're talking about inner child, like no baby is born like not trusting the world, right? Like, babies generally trust that they're going to be fed and that they're going to be kept warm and have a bed to sleep in. But then, like, when things start happening in life as you get older, and I'm talking even like 3 years old, and your mom doesn't give you juice and when she wants juice, it can just be little things like that just slowly create the human experience of you can't, and that can just create a belief, oh, I can't have everything that I want, or whatever. I'm getting sidetracked. But the point is that when you're as an adult and you're feeling that lack of trust, or just not trusting the process, not trusting yourself, not trusting men, whatever it is, it doesn't matter. It goes back to some sort of belief that you created or some sort of wound that happened from childhood. And so your job then is to heal it so that you can continue to trust yourself as an adult, because you can tell yourself, I can trust myself, I can trust myself. Like, you can do all the affirmations and all the mantras in the world. But at the end of the day, if you're only working within the mental realm and you're not healing the core emotions underneath it, then you're just relying on willpower to get you through. And like, if willpower worked, then like we'd all be like size 2s, right? Or whatever. I say that in jest, but like willpower doesn't really work in the long term. It might work for like a couple days or a week or a month or two if you're really lucky. But ultimately, to shift the way that you feel about yourself or the process or men or whatever it is, you have to go back and see, well, where did this belief begin to erode, or where did this thing happen where I began to not trust myself or trust other people or trust my ability to make decisions or whatever it is, because that's all that this is all about. And so you can heal that, then you can begin to make different choices and believe different things and feel different things in present day life. Does that make sense?
Amen. It totally makes sense. And it really is the whole theme of what our virtual retreat is about, is really respecting and appreciating that the majority of our success or lack of success when it comes to forming intimate relationships really has to do with that inner work. We can look stunning on the outside. We can know all of the feminine attraction strategies and the dating tips. We can have the best, online dating profile up. But if we're attracting and behaving from those areas where our wounds are, then you're going to run into some problems, right?
Totally. I talk about the 80-20 rule, and like basically the 80-20 rule is, I don't know, it's some concept that's related to productivity, right? But I think it kind of relates to dating and relationships. Like 80% of what is going to create the difference in your love life is not your outfit and is not the texting, the profiles. It's what's going on inside. It's doing the deeper work. And then 20% of what matters is the profiles and texting. And honestly, it could probably be lower than that, but just because the 80-20 rule is already a thing, then I just go with that. But yeah, absolutely. Like the inner work it just makes all the difference, because ultimately, like who you're attracting into your life, one, you're the common denominator. So that's always like a tough pill to swallow, but it's true. Right. And also they're just mirrors, right? So like I was attracting people who were basically non-committal. And at the time it was hard to see because I didn't have that level of awareness, but now it's very obvious. Of course I was attracting that. I was a freaking facade. I just thought like, oh, I just need to be skinny and blonde and I can attract any guy I want, and which might be true in terms of attracting a date or two, but it's not true in terms of attracting a long-term committed partnership.
Absolutely. Absolutely. Let's talk about a couple more common examples you see of how our relationship experiences or the challenges that we have relate back to some of those inner child wounds. And then I'm excited to dabble a little bit in a practical sense about what exactly that work is that we can do to shift that inner child work, to shift those experiences and the results.
Totally. So by far, I've already briefly mentioned it, so I won't go into it again that much, but by far, the number one pattern I see is what I call the narcissist people pleaser trap. So that's just number one. If I had a dime for every time someone wrote me in about some narcissist ex or something like that, I would have a lot of money, right? Like that's by far the number one thing. So that's just, I won't go into that because I already talked a little bit about that. Another actually interesting thing that I see a lot that has to do with inner child wounding is, and this is actually something, we talked about, I had a Get Over Your Ex challenge last year. And one of the reasons why I wanted to create that challenge is because a lot of times women really struggle to get over an ex, and it's not necessarily someone they've dated for years and years or even months and months. And then obviously there's a wounding process and a healing process that would naturally go with that. It's more of like they've gone on just a few dates, maybe dated only for like a couple of months. And yet here we are 6 months later and they haven't been able to get over that person. I see something like that all the time. So if you're listening to this and you are experiencing that, you're not alone. You're not crazy or weird or broken or nothing, anything like that. I've seen it a lot. And a big reason that we attach ourselves to these past relationships, even if, especially when we didn't even know the guy that well, or we didn't even date them that long, or wasn't that serious. It absolutely has to tie back to inner child work and our core wounds. So I'll just give you a brief example from a past client of mine. So I had a client who couldn't get over an ex for a really long time, and just a long time. And we were talking about it, and what we discovered is something happened when she was a little girl, around 5 or 6 or so. And before that thing that happened, when she was a lot younger, she was just like this free spirit. You know, she was creative, she was a little kid, she was just really in that childlike state. And then after that age, around the thing that happened around 5 or 6, she grew up. And she basically had to start taking care of a lot of the people in her family. And there was this guy she couldn't get over. And we were just, well, how did you relate to him? What did you make him mean? What was the story you told about himself? What does he remind you? Like all those types of questions are really important questions, or really good questions to ask yourself when you're looking to get over an ex, especially when it's someone you can't seem to let go of. And what we discovered is that when she was with him, he reminded her of herself before she was 5 years old, and brought her back to that childlike and not having to take care of everyone else in her life state. And so of course she doesn't want to cut off that person entirely, because it was a really precious and really sweet time in her life. And she missed a lot of the rest of her childhood because of things that had happened. And so my question, to people listening, or to, just my clients, is what are you making them mean? Like, what do you feel like that you can't give yourself that they're giving you? And so once we were able to bring in this childlike state, like this creativity, the sense of play, like releasing the need to take care of everyone else and actually stopping to do that, then that's when things began to shift. And it wasn't even like a process of getting over her ex. It was just her ex became obsolete. But we did that not just by like talking over and over and over and over in circles about her ex. We did that by really bringing out this inner 5-year-old and healing her wounds of having to basically be stuffed into the closet all of these years, and really embracing this like childlike mindset, in the ways that like a 30-something would do, right? It's not about just actually acting like a child, but just bringing some of that into her life now. And it's just like, oh, like her ex who? Like, it's not even like a thing anymore. And I've seen this a lot. So I always ask my clients, well, what are you making him mean? What's the story? What do you believe that he's giving you that you can't give yourself? And when you can begin to really dig deep into journal into those questions, you can begin to see what the attachment to him really is about. And then, from whatever those answers are to those questions is when you can begin to then do things differently, or see things differently, or feel about something in a different way. And that's, I think, when you can begin to move on. I just want to say one thing, like, this doesn't mean that if you're with someone for 6 months, a year, a few years, that you just got to get over him and like, whatever, do this work and just, your inner child, blah, blah, blah. I mean, it might, and there probably is some inner child work to do at some point in the process. But if you've been dating someone for a long time, like, allow yourself to feel sad, right? Like, screw this whole thing of like, I'm not going to cry about it, or I'm just going to go back out there. Like, no, like, you actually have to process your feelings. That's when we repeat them, or that's when we regurgitate and recycle the emotions, and then therefore the patterns. So allow yourself to feel sad a lot, not going into victim mode and like pity mode, but like, just feel sad. Like, it's normal. Even if you know the guy was a jerk or not the right person for you or whatever, it still hurts. And the dream of the relationship and letting that go still hurts. And so, the story that I shared is really if you feel like you're just not able to let go of someone and it was forever ago, or you didn't really know him that well, or didn't date that long or whatever. But if you did date for a long time, or you were married or whatever, like, be sad. You're allowed to be sad too.
I think that's so, so important. And I love that you've given us some journaling questions there to start to uncover perhaps where some of that, the source of some of that wounding that might be related to your experience with that particular person. Once we've got an inkling perhaps of what's coming up, and journaling obviously is a great practice, where to from there as far as the inner child work and shifting that?
Yeah. So once you can connect to where the belief is coming from, or, what the event that might be creating the belief that you have, then you actually want to go back and you actually want to have a conversation with your inner child. What did she need to hear at the time that she didn't? What would you want her to know that she wasn't told at the time? What does she actually need from you? Now, I'll say that a lot of times kids don't really do well when they're being talked at, right? So neither is your inner child. What they need is they need someone to hold the space for them. They need to feel loved. They need to feel supported, and they need to feel like they belong, right? And so how can you give that to your inner child? You can visit her through a journaling session. You can write a letter to her. You can visit her through a meditation. You can visit her by actually literally talking out loud. You can even have there's an empty chair in front of me. So you can actually have an empty chair and you sit in the empty, or you sit in your chair, and then you talk to your inner child and you get up, go in the other chair, be your inner child, talk back. And what would the inner child say? How would she respond? And just engage, yes, in a dialogue, but also very much in a loving, supportive, nurturing, caring relationship. Because again, these things that happen created these limiting beliefs, and all of this stuff is just to keep you safe, and it's all this stuff just to fill this void. And the thing is that no one in the world can fill any void for you in a healthy way. Only you can do that. So you may not have had the parents that you wanted. Maybe you didn't. It was just some things that happened, right? But if you didn't have the parents that you wanted, you don't have to go back to them trying to get that void filled, because that might just reopen the wound. You can actually fill that void yourself, so you're not trying to get it filled from other people. And so, having a dialogue, and then one thing I kind of call things the spa versus shower method. So most of us take a shower every day, or at least every other day, fairly regularly, right? But the spa, you might only go once a year, a couple times a year, once a month. It's not a thing you're going to do every day, because you might not have the time or money or, for it. And so in terms of sitting down to write a letter to your inner child, or meditating on her, or talking to her, you might not do that every day. That's the spa method, but still, just because you go to the spa doesn't mean you don't have to shower for the month. You still have to do daily hygiene. And so some daily spiritual hygiene, I just love to have a picture of yourself from when you were around that age, and your eyes just cross over every day, having her in your bathroom, you brush your teeth, or in your nightstand. I have her here in my office, just sending her love, just oh, I haven't forgotten you, and just 30 seconds, a breath, whatever you have, just sending her love. And that's daily hygiene, so that you can begin to fill that void yourself, so that you're not reaching outside of yourself to have that filled.
Beautiful. I love that idea. I've actually not heard that before. So get a photo of your younger self and really send all the beautiful love and beautiful intention and compassion that you would, as an adult, give to your younger self. I love that so much.
Yeah. And another thing that I really like to do is, a lot of these beliefs that are passed down, whatever it is, right? For me, the body image belief was totally it's a generational thing in my family, right? I know my Nana, said a lot of things to me and my mom and my sister about bodies, and I'm sure her mother and their mother, blah, blah, blah. But And so it's very generational. And so what I also actually find helpful is if you have photos of your ancestors, whether it's a grandparent or a great grandparent, if you're lucky to have double great grandparents or whatever, and you have photos of them, to have them, their faces and their photos out as well, because even if they might have passed down maybe some unhelpful limiting beliefs around women or bodies or relationships or what marriage means or whatever, I still find it really helpful, because even if they pass that down, we know that they didn't want worse for their kids, right? Parents just want better for the next generation. And so if you're 3 or 4 generations down from these people in your photos, just reminding yourself, they wanted better for me. They didn't want me to, if you're suffering because you feel like you constantly have to lose 10 pounds or whatever, if you're suffering because you feel like you have to please everyone in order to be loved, yes, that might have been a belief that you picked up from your parents and they picked up from their grandparents. Obviously, none of it's out of malice or because they're bad people. And so just reminding yourself that your great grandparents wanted better for you. even if they didn't know you, they still wanted better for you. And so however you're suffering because of these beliefs, like they don't want you to do that, and it's safe to let it go.
Yeah, that's super, super powerful. There's just, before we kind of wrap up, I've loved this conversation so much. There's actually one common, I guess, core wound or issue that I often hear a lot of women say, and I'm interested to hear how you can relate that back to the inner child work. But a lot of us kind of have this belief when we really dig deep that maybe love's not going to happen for us, or we're going to be like that one person that's never really going to find it. And underneath that, I guess it's just, not really knowing whether we are worthy of that real next level love. And I know that most of the women that are on this retreat, they're not looking for ordinary love. They're really looking for that really deep and meaningful connection. But a lot of them have doubts whether that's really possible and whether they're worthy. Can that issue be managed or supported by inner child work?
Yeah. So, I mean, it definitely falls into worthiness, but I would get even more specific and say, well, at what time in your life did you feel like you didn't belong? Or at what time in your life where you felt like the black sheep? Or at what time in your life where you felt like you were told that you can't dream big and you just have to settle for the ordinary? And it may not have been in love, right? You might have been taught that in the world of career, like, don't go to college and do all this stuff. Just, get a job and like support yourself and just be fine. But maybe you wanted to go be a doctor or an astronaut or I don't know, something else. Right. And so you just created this belief of like, oh, I should just, make things simple or not try to go big because that's not even something that, I can have. Or it might've been a belief around or something you were told that like those people were different from you, all these like, I don't know, let's say I'm just random example. Like, let's say you grew up rather poor, right? Or at least not a lot of money or not super rich, right? Well, maybe like your parents had this belief that people who are rich are just like a whole different level of human being. Like, who are those people? Are they even humans? Right. And so then you kind of picked up on that too. And yes, maybe their limiting belief was around people with money, but maybe you also tied that into love. And so for someone who feels like that, well, they're just not cut out for a next level love or like a big kind of love that they want to call in, I would just say, well, when have you felt like that before? Or what does that remind you of? Or, and this is something I haven't asked, whose voice is that in your head? Like, who's telling you that? Like, yes, I get that you're the one telling yourself that maybe next level love isn't in the cards for you, but you didn't come out of the uterus believing that or thinking that. So somewhere along the way, someone imprinted something in your brain about that. And again, it may not necessarily be in the love department. It could have been in the career department or the money department or the health and wellness and body department. And so whose voice is that? Where did it come from? Because then once you can tie it to that, then you can go back and do the inner child work and do the journaling, the meditating and having the picture and all that kind of stuff and work through that. Because if you on some level believe that, next level love isn't a thing for you or it's not going to happen for you, then you're going to make that be true. We're really good manifestors, whether we're manifesting what we want or don't want. Like, we're good manifestors. Like, I have people telling me all the time, Veronica, I want to learn how to manifest. And I just keep attracting all these like da guys. And then we talk a little bit about their childhood. I'm like, oh, well, you're manifesting exactly what you need and exactly what makes you feel safe. So you're actually a very good manifester. It's just more about manifesting what you actually want versus what you don't want. So that's what I would say.
Brilliant. I really love that. And let's talk now about how our beautiful audience can take this work a little bit further and what sort of tools or gifts that we have available for them today to be able to, explore working with you and absorbing your wisdom.
Definitely. So I would love to invite people. This is more time sensitive, but in February this year, I'm hosting a Date Yourself challenge. And that's just a challenge to really date yourself, get to know yourself, to attract in the kind of relationship that you want. And you can sign up for that at veronicagrant.com/date yourself challenge. And I also have a quiz on discovering your love block. So after working with many, many women, I've categorize a lot of the blocks that I've seen into 4 main love blocks. So if you're like, well, I'm interested about this kind of love block thing, what is it? How do I actually work through it? Then my quiz will help, and you can grab that at veronicagrant.com/quiz.
Super, super important, because we really, we can go on this personal development journey and this self-healing journey for it can last for a really long time. But if we're really intentional about understanding what our blocks are and clearing those, you can really fast track this experience to creating healthy love, right?
Oh, totally. This can happen pretty quickly, I think. I've had clients who started working with me, were really blocked. They just really did the work. And by the end of our time working together, they had met someone. It can happen. I mean, everyone's obviously on their own time. So whether or not it happens fast for you doesn't mean anything, but it can happen fast in a really healthy way.
Brilliant. Thank you so much, Veronica, for your amazing wisdom that you've shared today. Everyone, make sure that you hit the button below the video and get access to that Love Blocks quiz. Super, super important. And obviously all of the experts that we have on our amazing panel for the event are touching on each of those different love blocks. So it is really important that you can definitely hone in on the ones that you feel are much more relevant to you. And thank you so much for sharing that quiz with us. It's awesome. Is there anything else that you'd like to share before we finish up today?
Anything that I'd like to share? I think if there is one thing, is to just, I know this is like kind of sounds cliche, but just go with your gut. If something doesn't feel right for you, if something's bothering you, whether it's like a person online or just some new thing you want to try, if it doesn't feel right, then, you're allowed to say no. You don't have to have a reason. You don't have to have an excuse. You can just say no. Put yourself first.
Super important. Absolutely. So thanks everyone for tuning in today. Make sure that you check out all the social media links for Veronica as well and get connected with her and stay part of her tribe. And we'll see you again for tomorrow's Love Transformation class. Bye for now.